life of 2 years, non-consanguineous marriage, residing at Andheri West, Hindu by religion, and is educated till 10th standard. Her husband is an electrician, has studied till 12th standard. According to modified Kupuswamy classification, the family belongs to socio-economic class 4. Patient came with 8 months of amenorrhea. Her obstetric status is G1P0A0. Her last menopausal period was at 19th January 2019 and expected date of delivery is 26th October 2020 by Nagli's rule. Her gestational age is 34 weeks, that is 237 days by date. Patient came with chief complaints of bilateral swelling of lower limbs since 8 days. Patient was apparently all right 8 days back when she noticed swelling of both lower limbs, which is present throughout the day and is aggravated by work. There is no history of headache, no history of blurring of vision, no history of epigastric or right hypochondriac pain. There is no history of decreased fetal movements, no history of seizures. There is no history of oliguria or any other urinary complaints, no history of edema prior to pregnancy. Menstrual history. The patient attained menarche at 12 years. The past menstrual cycles were regular. Bleeding was for 4 days. Moderate flow with number of pads of 2 to 3 daily fully soaked. There was no pain associated with menses. The present obstetric history. Patient has conceived spontaneously for the first time after 2 years of marriage. She is a primigravida. First trimester history. UPT was done 1 week following missed periods. She registered at Cooper Hospital 2 weeks later. There is no history of fever with rash, urinary tract infections, vomiting, drug intake, or radiation exposure. There is no history of bleeding PV. Second trimester history. USG was done at 4th and 6th months of pregnancy. History of quickening at around 5 months. Tetanus vaccination first dose was taken. Iron and folic acid supplements and calcium supplements are taken. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Continue.
There is no history of polyuria, polydipsia, and OGTT was done, which was normal. Third trimester history. Tetanus vaccination second dose was taken. Total completed ANC visits are 5. Fetal movements are adequately felt, and there is no history of bleeding PV or leaking PV. Past history. No history of diabetes mellitus, tuberculosis, hypertension, bronchial asthma, or epilepsy or any thyroid disorders. There is no history of blood transfusion or drug allergies. Personal history. Normal sleep and appetite. Bladder bowel habits are normal. There is no drug allergy or any addiction. Family history is not contributory. Contraceptive history. There is no history of use of contraception. Dietary history. Patient takes a mixed diet. On basis of 24-hour recall method, total calories consumed is 2025 kilocalories. Deficient being 455 kilocalories. Total protein intake is 50 grams. Deficiency is about 10 grams. Ma'am, should I continue with general examination?
Please continue. Yeah.
Examination was done with due consent in a well-lit room. Patient is conscious, cooperative, well-oriented to time-place person. She is well-built and nourished, or febrile to touch. Pulse is 76 per minute, regular, adequate volume, tension, equal on both sides. No radio-radial or radio-femoral delay. Peripheral pulses are felt. Respiratory rate is 16 per minute. Blood pressure is 140 by 90 mm of Hg, taken in right brachial artery in supine position. Her height is 158 centimeters and weight is 60 kgs.
Just a minute. What is the BP exactly?
Ma'am, right 140 by 90.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Ma'am, BMI is 24.1. There is no pallor, icterus, cyanosis, clubbing or lymphadenopathy. Edema is present. It is bilaterally on both on lower limbs, near the ankle, and pitting in nature. There are no dilated veins in the neck or any thyroid swelling seen or palpable. Breast examination. Normal changes secondary to pregnancy are seen. The breast is enlarged, pigmented nipple areola complex, and prominent Montgomery tubercles are seen. Abdominal examination. On inspection, the abdomen is globular with an everted umbilicus. Linea nigra and striae gravidarum are seen. There are no scars or dilated veins seen. On palpation, abdomen is soft, non-tender. There is no rigidity, no guarding. Uterus size corresponds to 32 weeks of gestation. The fundal height is 32 centimeters. Abdominal girth is 34 centimeters. The expected fetal weight is 3.1 kgs, which is equals to 3,100 grams. Leopard's manure, fundal grip, a soft, broad, irregular mass felt, suggestive of breech, lateral grip, a continuous board-like resistance felt on the right side, suggestive of fetal back. On left side, multiple knob-like structures felt, suggestive of fetal limbs. First pelvic grip, a hard globular palatable structure felt, suggestive of fetal head. Second pelvic grip, hands converge, suggestive of floating head. And sinciput is at a higher level than the occiput, suggestive of well-flexed fetal head. On auscultation, fetal heart sounds are heard. The heart rate is 130 beats per minute, regular in rhythm. Other system examination, no abnormality is detected. And my provisional diagnosis is patient Nandini More, a 21-year-old tiny gravida. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I didn't interrupt. Yes, yes.
Provisional diagnosis patient Nandini More, a 21-year-old primary gravida who came with 8 months of amenorrhea, presented with chief complaints of bilateral swelling of both lower limbs, with a gestational age 34 weeks, with a single live fetus in longitudinal lie and cephalic presentation, is a case of pregnancy-induced hypertension, probably mild preeclampsia without any complications.
Okay. So now you tell me, how did you label it as mild preeclampsia?
Ma'am, because only first of all, the BP is not BP is 140 by 90, and there is only edema seen. There are no other features like headache or epigastric pain or blurring of vision or any other evidence of end organ damage like elevated means liver or renal problems.
Yes. First of all, you labeled it as pregnancy-induced hypertension. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
First, you label it as pregnancy-induced hypertension, but how will you categorize that it is preeclampsia?
Ma'am, there is swelling of both lower limbs, which suggests a pathological edema because it's present throughout the day. And therefore, it suggests that there is proteinuria present. So, it is preeclampsia.
How do you know there is proteinuria? That is what I'm asking. Like, there is suppose a female with there's a female with similar history, 32 weeks pregnancy with BP 140/90, again with swelling of both the lower limbs, again with but her HB is 6. Her HB is 6. So can she be labeled as preeclampsia? How will you differentiate whether it is preeclampsia or that edema can be there is a pathological edema, but that can be secondary only to proteinuria or secondary to preeclampsia only?
No, ma'am. It can be due to other causes also, like any liver disease or kidney disease, anemia also.
Yeah. So how are you labeling it? Like, how will you diagnose? How will you diagnose that it is proteinuria?
Ma'am, we'll have to do investigations like to confirm.
This proteinuria means protein in urine. You have to do
urine albumin.
Urine albumin. So how will you differentiate that the patient, she is a pregnancy-induced hypertension patient. But what is the classification? Now you tell me, what is the classification of pregnancy-induced hypertension?
Ma'am, it is classified as gestational hypertension, where the blood pressure is at least 140 by 90 mm of Hg without proteinuria, and it occurs after 20 weeks of gestation. Then preeclampsia, where the BP is more than equal to 140 by 90, and there is evidence of proteinuria.
So is a single reading of 140/90, can you label it as pregnancy-induced hypertension or gestational hypertension?
No, ma'am, we'll have to take. No, ma'am, not in a single reading. We'll have to take 2 readings, and that should be at least 4 hours apart.
Yes, so you have to mention in the definition that 2 BP readings of more than or equal to 140/90, 6 hours apart or 4 hours apart. The modified definition says 6 hours apart can be labeled tension. If it is accompanied with proteinuria, then you can label it as preeclampsia after 20 weeks of gestation. Edema is not a mandatory criteria. Proteinuria is a more mandatory criteria to label it as a preeclampsia. Okay, so your patient has bilateral limb edema. So without doing a proteinuria test, you can't, without having a evidence of proteinuria or having a urine albumin test, you can't label it as preeclampsia. So that is the first thing. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So now this patient is 32 weeks with BP of 140/90. Now, how will you manage this patient?
Ma'am, first of all, we'll confirm with urine albumin that whether it's preeclampsia or a gestational hypertension. Now we'll classify her as mild or severe preeclampsia, as the history suggests that it is mild. So I'll continue her pregnancy till 37 weeks of gestation, and after that induction of labor will be done at 37 weeks. Ma'am, we can start her hypertensives if the BP exceeds 150 by 100 mm of Hg, and in case she develops some premonitory symptoms like headache or epigastric pain or blurring of vision.
Like now she's 32 weeks. So what all investigation you want to send? So whether you will on OPD basis or whether you'll admit her, how will you do? Now this patient is already admitted because since you have taken the history, so I guess that this patient is admitted. Okay.
Yes.
So this patient is admitted in your ward. So now what all investigation will you send?
Ma'am, first of all, we'll do the blood investigations like hemoglobin to rule out anemia, then platelet counts to see whether there is thrombocytopenia, which occurs in HELLP syndrome, then urine and serum creatinine ratio. Then we'll go for fundoscopy to see the retinal changes.
Which ratio?
Ma'am, ma'am, I said serum and urine creatinine. Sorry if I said ratio, but it's not ratio. We'll go for that investigation.
Now you have pulled yourself into this trap. Now you tell me which ratios are done. In preeclampsia, we do some ratios to diagnose preeclampsia, severe preeclampsia. What are those ratios? See, whenever you do a presentation, whenever you answer any question, you should know what you're answering, because you utter a word which is different from the way you're going, so it will drag you into a trap. So now you tell me what are the ratios which are done.
Ma'am, first protein and urine protein creatinine ratio is done to diagnose proteinuria.
You have to be very sure it has to be urine protein and urine creatinine. So normally what we do is serum creatinine, but the ratio which we do here is urine protein and urine protein to urine creatinine. Yes. Continue.
Ma'am, ratios.
No, continue with the what investigation you were doing.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, then we'll do serial ultrasounds to see, means to monitor the health of the fetus, whether there is any intrauterine growth retardation or any other complications.
Me CBC, that is hemoglobin and platelet count. You told me
Yes,
hemoglobin and platelet count. Then
yes,
you told
ma'am.
me the serum creatinine.
Yes, ma'am.
Other than that,
Ma'am, liver enzymes.
liver enzymes. Okay. Other than that,
Ma'am,
do you profile of this patient?
ma'am, can you please repeat?
Can you will you do you want to know the coagulation profile of this patient? Coagulation blood PTINR.
Yes,
The
ma'am.
thrombin
We
time.
need to know. Yes, ma'am. We need to know.
So these are the. Okay. So now you will. Okay. So these are the blood tests. Then in urine, when you come to urine, so you will do a urine protein. If you want to do a ratio, then you will do a urine protein to creatinine ratio. Okay. Then now you come to the ultrasound. Now, what all parameters you're looking for in ultrasound?
Ma'am, we'll see the fetal health and the amniotic fluid index.
Okay. So then, like suppose this the scan is suggestive there is oligohydramnios. The AFI is 8 centimeters. So is AFI 8 centimeter normal for a 32 weeks of gestation ANC patient? So am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am.
Now assume that this ultrasound is normal. Okay, the ultrasound is normal. So you want to do any other ultrasound because she's 32 weeks of gestation to confirm any other parameters of the fetus?
Ma'am, should we go for Doppler to see the uteroplacental circulation?
So am I bothered about uteroplacental circulation or fetoplacental at this weeks of gestation? See, uteroplacental circulation, in last time when I was discussing previous LSCs, I have told that the wave of the cytotrophoblast, invasion of cytotrophoblast at 12 weeks and 16 weeks. So there is complete development of uteroplacental circulation till 16 weeks. So if there is so what we do, we see a wave, a diastolic notching in uterine artery. So that gives us the idea of the establishment of uteroplacental circulation. Now what we are more bothered about the fetoplacental circulation, whether the placenta, which has been the uteroplacental circulation, which is well developed, whether that placenta is able to deliver adequate blood supply and oxygen to the fetus. So what we are more bothered about is the fetoplacental circulation, and which is the artery which will guide us which is the artery in Doppler which will guide us that the fetoplacental circulation is adequate.
Umbilical artery.
Yes, and which is one more artery. So there are the three readings which we see in fetal Doppler. One is the uterine artery, the second is the umbilical artery, as you told, and there is one more artery. Which artery? Middle cerebral artery. That is the middle cerebral artery. So whenever, when you come towards or whenever you go through a ultrasound, if you so just see that the Doppler has three readings. It has a uterine artery, which is more suggestive up to 20 weeks. In later weeks of gestation, we are not much bothered about. The second is the umbilical artery and the middle cerebral artery, which we are more bothered about. Okay. So now you did a fetal Doppler for her, which is again, it is normal. Assume that it is normal. So now what will you do? She's 32 weeks of gestation, primary gravida patient, admitted in your ward. Her first BP, her two BP readings are 140/90, and assume her urine albumin is 1+. That is more than 3 gram per deciliter. That is why you have labeled her as preeclampsia. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And you have done the investigation. The investigation are absolutely normal. Now you have done this ultrasound and the Doppler, which are normal. Now what else will you do?
Ma'am, as such, now we won't do any investigation. We'll keep her under monitoring and we'll take her BP at regular intervals.
Would you like to start any antihypertensive?
Ma'am, not at this stage. If she develops certain symptoms like headache or blurring of vision or epigastric pain, or if her BP exceeds 150 by 100 millimeters of mercury, then we can start hypertensive like labetalol.
No. What is the indication for starting antihypertensive?
Ma'am, the BP should exceed 150 by 100 mm of Hg.
Yes, 150 or 100, either of the reading. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Either the systolic should be 150 or more than this diastolic should be 100. Okay. The first point which you told that you will wait for the symptoms to appear. When symptoms will appear that she's complaining of epigastric pain or she's complaining of headache, what will you label her? Will you label her as?
Ma'am, then she'll be labeled as severe preeclampsia.
Or impending eclampsia. See, what are the signs of eclampsia? When will you call her as eclampsia? When she's throwing a convulsion.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. When throwing a convulsion, she's an eclampsia. But these signs which I'm talking about, headache, blurring of vision, and epigastric pain, decrease in urine output, these are the signs of impending eclampsia. That she is severe preeclamptic, but she can land up into eclampsia anytime. So we will not wait for the symptoms to appear to start antihypertensive. Though theory says that any of the BP reading, either systolic or diastolic, more than 150/100 to start antihypertensive, but practically if a 2 or 3 readings are more than 140/90 or are consistently 140/90, we will start an antihypertensive. Why? Because at pregnancy, they have in second trimester they have a tendency that they go into hypotension. That when a patient presents with 140/90 BP, it is possible that her BP is actually very high, but due to second trimester, it is coming to 140/90. So now when she's come into third trimester, we should not ignore those findings and we should continuously monitor those readings. Still, if all BP readings are 140/90, practically we will start an antihypertensive. But theoretically, you were right that any of the readings should be either the systolic should be more than 150 or more than 150, or diastolic should be 100 or more than 100. Okay. So now, which is the antihypertensive of choice of antihypertensive drug which you will use?
Ma'am, labetalol.
Okay, why labetalol?
Ma'am, because it is found to be safe in pregnancy and it does not compromises the means the placental circulation, so that it won't be there won't be a decreased blood supply to the fetus.
Okay. So what are other antihypertensives used?
Ma'am, other hypertensives for chronic hypertension, we preferably choose alpha methyl dopa, or we can use
I'm asking about this patient. I'm not labeling it as chronic hypertension. I'll come to it later, classification, everything. But this patient, what are the other drugs which can be used?
Ma'am, we can use hydralazine, nitroglycerine, or sodium nitroprusside.
Nitroglycerine. Directly. These are mainly used for hypertensive emergencies. Nitroglycerine, alpha methyl dopa. You are correct, very correct. Then what all other drugs? Have you heard about calcium channel blockers? Nifedipine?
Yes, ma'am. Nifedipine we can use.
Yes. So you should not know that only labetalol is the first choice of drug. But if a patient, there are other, you should also know about the other class of drugs. So labetalol, that is alpha methyl dopa, that is a centrally acting sympathomimetic. And what is the calcium channel blockers? That is the nifedipine. Okay. So now this patient, suppose this is all, now what else? I would like, she's 32 weeks, she's admitted in the ward. I have done all the investigations. Everything is absolutely normal, but all BP readings are 140/90, so I don't want to take any risk. I will start antihypertensive at a minimal dose, that is labetalol 100 milligram twice daily. what is the maximum dose of labetalol which I can give in a day?
No, ma'am, I don't know. I'm not aware of that.
Okay, so it is 20 to 100 grams. Okay.
Okay.
So you have to titrate. If a BP is not getting controlled, so first you will give 100 twice daily, 100 thrice daily, 200 thrice daily, and then you can titrate up to 20 to 100 in once a day. Okay, this is fine. Now suppose this patient is not performing she's complaining that her BP is increasing, she is not getting control, she's already admitted. I want to give her one injection because I don't know, I may have to terminate her early. What are the injection I want to give, or I like to give? She's already admitted in the ward, we are managing her conservatively, but still I want to give her one injection because I may have to deliver her early.
Ma'am, steroids we can give for lung maturation of the fetus.
Yes. So whenever a high-risk patient, just remember this, whenever a high-risk patient, you admitted in preterm weeks of gestation, whatever investigation are you investigating? Suppose there's an anemia patient you're admitting to the ward, though she's 32 weeks, you know that she will not land up with the labor right now, but it is better to give steroids. Okay, so what is the, which is the drug, what is the, which composition we give and what is the dose of that drug?
Ma'am, we use dexamethasone.
Okay. So what is the dosage schedule? Or if Dexa is not available, what else can we give?
Ma'am, betamethasone can be given, and it is given 12 milligrams 24 hours apart intramuscularly.
So how many doses?
Ma'am, 2 doses 24 hours apart.
Okay, and Dexa? So you have to half the dose.
Okay, 6 milligrams.
6 milligram for?
Ma'am, 12 hours apart.
Okay, the answering. It is coming in the chat box. Okay, fine. So now you have admitted her already. You have given the steroid cover. So now, but suppose this patient, the Doppler is suggestive of changes. It is showing that there is the decrease. There is some features of fetoplacental insufficiency. So now, what else you will do? How long will you continue this pregnancy?
Ma'am, if there is fetoplacental insufficiency.
Yes. So how long will you continue this pregnancy?
Ma'am, 37 weeks. Ma'am, because she is a case of mild preeclampsia, we can continue till 37 weeks.
But her Doppler is showing changes. Her BP is 140/90, but that fetus is getting affected. The mother is not getting affected. The secondary to preeclampsia, there can be complications in the mother or in the fetus. Now you told me end organ damage. So the maternal vasculature, there will be microvascular thrombopathy in the mother, or due to which she will have this liver failure or whatever. There can be renal failure in second, but there can be microangiopathy of the placental circulation. So secondary to this placenta and fetus is getting affected. So will I continue till 37 weeks?
Ma'am, I'm not sure about
Yes, so in that case, you will not continue the 30 weeks. You have to serially monitor the USG and the Doppler findings. So when there's a fetoplacental insufficiency, you have to wait for the first level is there is decreased end-diastolic flow. Decreased end-diastolic flow in the uterine Doppler, that is suggestive there is decrease in the circulation from the placenta through the placenta from the mother to the fetus. The second is there is absent. Absent means there is no flow from the placenta to the fetus. And the third stage is the reversal of flow, that the blood is flowing reversely from the fetus to the mother. So we have to serially monitor the Doppler. And in the stage she has reached absent, or when the it is reducing. Suppose in first Doppler it is suggestive of reduced end diastolic flow. That is, there is reduced blood flow towards the fetus. Again, we will repeat the Doppler after 1 week. There is more reduction in the blood flow. So this is the time that we don't wait. We have, because we have covered the steroid. We have given her the steroid for fetal lung maturity. She has reached 33, 34 weeks. So we can induce her. So we don't need to wait for absent and reversal of flow. If there is serially decreasing end diastolic flow or it has reached absent diastolic flow, those are the indication we need to terminate her. Or the second indication that her BP is not getting controlled or her blood parameters are showing that there is the PTNR has decreased, that she's going into coagulopathy, or her platelet count is getting decreased, or she's going into HELP. So these are the indicators. Okay, so now you told me that in blood investigations, her hemoglobin, if hemoglobin is less, you have to rule out that whether she's anemic or not. Can low HB be indicative of something else in a preeclampsia patient? Suppose this patient, her HB comes out to be 7, and 2 months prior her HB was 10. 2 months prior her HB was HB done was 10 on OPD basis. That time she was not diagnosed as a preeclampsia, but now her HB has come to 7. So what is that suggestive of?
Ma'am, it suggests hemolysis, which is one of the component of HELP syndrome.
But what is HELP?
Ma'am, it indicates hemolysis, elevated liver enzymes, and low platelet count. So, ma'am, one of the component is hemolysis, which can decrease hemoglobin. So maybe
if only HB is low, can you label it as HELP?
No, ma'am. The 3 components are to be present.
3 components have to be present. Three components have to be present. Have you heard about partial HELP? Have you know the classification of HELP syndrome? There's a partial HELP, there's a complete HELP. So if 2 parameters are also present, so we can label it as partial HELP. Okay. So this patient, see, so low hemoglobin is her previous 2 months prior her HB was 10, but now her hemoglobin is 7. So that is suggestive of hemo concentration. Second is preeclampsia, a patient whose hemoglobin is 10 but can present with 7. That is suggestive of hemo concentration. That her RBC have clumped secondary to microangiopathy. That is why her hemoglobin is coming 7. So that is again suggestive that she is a preeclamptic, which is going to worsen in near future. So that is again a marker that you need to think seriously about her diagnosis, that she is a preeclamptic patient, but she can land up with severe complications in near future because her hemoglobin 2 months prior was 7. Though she is a compliant patient, she is taking all her hematinic very well. She's having a good follow up on OPD basis, but still her now hemoglobin is coming 7. So that is pointing toward that she can preeclampsia in near future. Okay. So now you tell me, like you were telling me the classification. So like there is a pregnancy-induced hypertension. So first you told me that there is a gestational hypertension. The second is the preeclampsia. What are the other classes which come under this pregnancy-induced hypertension?
Ma'am, eclampsia, where the blood pressure is more than equal to 140 by 90 millimeters of mercury, taken 2 readings 4 hours apart. There are convulsions, and it also develops before 20 weeks, after 20 weeks of gestation. Then there is a fourth entity, which is chronic hypertension, which is blood pressure more than equal to 140 by 90 millimeters of mercury, and it develops before 20 weeks of gestation. There is term which is superimposition of hypertension, like superimposed preeclampsia or eclampsia on chronic hypertension.
Okay, fine. So now you told me eclampsia. So how will you, suppose this patient is admitted in the ward, you have started on an antihypertensive, now she threw the convulsion. So now you will label it as eclampsia. How will you manage this patient?
Ma'am, first of all, will manage her airway and make her lie supine in left lateral position by putting a mouth gag or a tongue depressor to prevent tongue bite. Secondly, we'll start her with MgSO4, and we usually followed the pit chart regimen for that, where the loading dose is 4 milligram intravenously, and
Yeah.
then we give 5 milligrams intramuscularly on each buttocks.
4 grams.
Yes,
Hello?
ma'am. Sorry. Yes,
4
ma'am.
grams.
Sorry. Yes, ma'am. Grams. And
Some medication which will be commonly kept in your this table, Viva and everything. So you should know the dosage of all these drugs. Huh?
yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, and then we'll start her with on the maintenance dose, which is 5 grams intramuscularly 4 hours apart. Uh, and then we'll monitor her, and then we'll start her with antihypertensive, which is usually again we follow labetalol, or we can give certain drugs like nifedipine or sodium nitroprusside for hypertensive emergency.
Okay. But don't come to sodium nitroprusside so commonly. It is very, very rarely used. Like I have never used sodium nitroprusside till now. So that is what I'm saying. So if there is a very hypertensive emergency which is not getting controlled on IV labetalol as well, this IV nifedipine and everything, then nitroprusside and everything. It is a not common drug unless and until we specifically ask you what are the drugs which are used in hypertensive emergency. Then only you say. Otherwise, you go for the common thing. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, in case the seizure, in case the seizures are controlled, then we can further monitor her. If in case they are not controlled, we can terminate the pregnancy. Or if she is near
What are
labor,
the parameters which you monitor? What are
ma'am,
the parameters which you monitor when you do Maxwell?
ma'am, we monitor the deep tendon reflexes, the respiratory rate, and the urine output.
Respiratory rate, the urine output,
And reflexes, deep tendon reflexes.
okay, fine. Now this patient was admitted in your ward. You will not monitor urine output.
Yes, ma'am, we will.
So the 4 parameters which you monitor. 4. So whenever a patient gets a convulsion, you told me more or less right. So whenever you get a patient gets a convulsion, you told me that we'll give her a left lateral position. You will you put a mouth gag to prevent the tongue bite, but you will also suction the secretion. But because due to convulsion, there is excessive saliva which she can aspirate, and she can land up with the pneumonia, or she can aspirate the secretion. So at this simultaneously, you have to suction the secretions as well. The rest was fine. The next thing, so what are the 4 parameters which you monitor? The first is that you will catheterize the patient. Okay, so we will catheterize the patient to monitor the urine output. The second, you will monitor deep tendon reflexes. You will monitor the respiratory rate and the SpO2. Okay. Now, okay. So now this patient has thrown the convulsion. You have given her Maxelf and everything. Now it is for what else? And now these are the maternal parameters which you have monitored. What else? Well, you are also bothered about the fetus. So then immediately you will check because she has thrown the convulsion. So the uterus goes into the tonicity, the tonic convulsions of the uterus as well. The uterus goes into the myospasm. So secondary to that, there is reduced blood circulation to the the seizures in the mother. They are accompanied by the bradycardia of the fetus. So immediately you have to auscultate the fetal heart. And if there is a bradycardia, and if there is no pickup in the bradycardia, that the fetal heart rate is not coming back to the normal, so you may have to terminate the pregnancy immediately, and you may have to do a emergency cesarean section for her. If the fetal so you may induce this patient if a Bishop score is good, and you may deliver her normally depending on what are the parameters are. So if there is fetal bradycardia, you may have to do an emergency cesarean section for her. Okay. Now I'll give you a case. So suppose there is a patient who comes to you, she's a second gravida. Now she gives you a history that in previous pregnancy she was severely preeclamptic, and secondary to that, her pregnancy was terminated early in 8 months. Okay, around 30 to 34 weeks. Now she has come to you at 12 weeks. What all extra advice will you give, or what all extra supplements will you give? Because once she was preeclamptic, it is possibility, there's a 33% chance that she can land up with preeclampsia in this pregnancy also. So what are the supplements will you add to her diet, or to what are the extra medication you want to give her so that her chances of preeclampsia are reduced? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you get my question?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, can you give the answer? I don't know about the answer. So, can you please
So
tell me?
first of all, there's a low sorry. Yeah, I'm telling. So first of all, that she has crossed 12 weeks, so calcium supplements can be given. So calcium is known to cause that it can reduce. There is no clear-cut rule established, but calcium can reduce the chances of preeclampsia in this pregnancy. The second is the aspirin. Aspirin, there is low dose aspirin that is 75 milligram, but now the dose recommended is 150 milligram. So 150 milligram of aspirin, it will reduces that the thrombotic, I told you that there is a invasion of cytotrophoblast. At the first wave occurs at 12 weeks, and the second wave starts at 15 weeks, which will get completed by 20 weeks. So if you start a low dose aspirin, it will reduce the thrombosis of the placental circulation, and it can reduce the later complications. Those aspirin you can start, and the other drugs which can be started are antioxidants, zinc. These are the other drugs which can be started. Okay, so the main two drugs which are commonly given and which are commonly used are the calcium supplements and the low dose aspirin. Okay.
Thank you.
Have any question you can ask? Hello.
Yeah, ma'am. I'm just checking if there are any questions. How to differentiate the edema on limbs is pathological or physiological due to pregnancy? Hello? 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 Ma'am, are you there? Ma'am, your mic is muted. Please unmute it. Hello? Ma'am, your mic is muted, ma'am.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Say, what were you saying?
How to differentiate the edema on limbs is pathological or physiological due to pregnancy?
Edema.
Yeah, how to differentiate the edema on limbs is pathological or physiological due to pregnancy?
On lens. On what was it? On? Hello.
How
Am I
to
audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, you are. The question is, ma'am, how to differentiate the edema on limbs is pathological or physiological due to pregnancy?
Yeah, see, if it is a physiological edema of pregnancy, it occurs. It occurs on the depending part, and it disappears with the rest. Suppose a normal pregnant female, a normal AMC without any complications, she's working, she's roaming around, so you can see on it depending on her leg. But when she rests, when she give limb elevation to her leg, so it will disappear away, and it is mostly up to the ankle. But a pathological edema, it can be when it is progressing, it will come up to the knees, it can come up to the thighs, and it will not disappear on rest. And also, sometimes it can be accompanied with pain also. So that this is how which we differentiate. It is a pathological edema or a physiological edema.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, another question. What is the significance of asking bleeding PV in a patient having bilateral pedal edema?
Okay. So now first of all, you need to know that whether there's a bilateral pedal edema, so whether it is pathological or it is physiological. So we should know the reasons of pathological edema. So first of all is the anemia. Second is the severe preeclampsia. These are the two common. Then the less common are the liver disease, the heart disease, and everything. So in anemia and both in severe preeclampsia, there is a chances that there can be antepartum hemorrhage. So whenever a patient comes to us, when a patient comes to us in second or third trimester and she complains of bleeding PV, so we need to rule out whether there is antepartum hemorrhage. So antepartum hemorrhage, which is more commonly associated with preeclampsia, is abruption, not placenta previa. In placenta previa, that the placenta is only low lying. It will not happen secondary to preeclampsia, but abruption occurs secondary to preeclampsia. There is sudden rise in blood pressure, due to which there is rupture of the placental vasculature, and this leads to abruption. So these are the two, because the abruption is common with anemia and preeclampsia. That is why if there is bilateral limb edema, you need to rule out these two causes.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, if cesarean is contraindicated in PIH, why?
No, cesarean is not contraindicated in PIH. See, PIH is not a direct indication for cesarean section. Like I told you, like this patient, like I give you example, she threw the conversion, and there's a fetal bradycardia and which is not coming back to the normal. So I'll have to do a cesarean section of that because she has already thrown a conversion, and secondary to which there's a fetal bradycardia. But still, if her fetus heart is coming back to the normal, there's a pickup. Again, it is not going down. And when I do a PV, she's 2 centimeter dilated, and I know that she can deliver normally. Then I like to deliver her normally, because always a vaginal delivery is better than a cesarean section in any high risk patient, like in a preeclampsia. So PIH is not a contraindication. It is not a direct contraindication, or it is not a direct indication. You have to assess case to. Suppose if a patient, she is 34 weeks patient with previous LSPS, she's severe PIH, I'll do a direct section for her. Whereas if there is other patient with previous LSPS, she wants a VBAC, I will like to give her a VBAC. Okay, so if again there is one more case, she's a 36 weeks patient, her BP is not getting controlled. I have given a Labid, I have given a Depen, I have given IV Labid also, still her BP is not getting controlled. So what is the treatment? What is the treatment of uncontrolled blood pressure in pregnancy? That is pregnancy-induced hypertension. If it is not getting controlled, the ultimate aim is to terminate the pregnancy, because it is secondary to pregnancy. So if there's a term pregnancy or a near-term pregnancy, I know the baby is salvageable. I know that if we have an NICU, good NICU care, if the baby is 2 kg or above 2 kg, we have given steroid cover. We can do a direct section for her, because we need to terminate her immediately because the BP is not getting controlled. But if her BP is well of controlled and antihypertensive drug, I can induce that patient. So you have to be with that. It is not a direct contraindication. It is not a direct indication. It depends case to case, right? Okay.
Okay, ma'am. Safety and efficacy of MgSO4 in eclampsia in COVID-19 symptomatic patient having respiratory distress.
Okay, so if she's already respiratory, because see, magnesium sulfate itself, because magnesium sulfate is not given in one dose, it has to be continuously it has to be given 4 hourly. Whether give you a Pritchard regime or if you give a Zuspan regime, it has to be continuously given. So the one parameter like which this magnesium sulfate it causes the relaxation of the respiratory muscle if it crosses the therapeutic range. So if a patient is already in respiratory distress, we'll not give her Maxel. We'll give her other anticonvulsant drugs like Levipil. What is Levipil? These are the other drugs which can be, levetiracetam. So these are the drugs which will be given. So magnesium sulfate will not be given. Magnesium sulfate is given because unless proved otherwise, if a patient throws a conversion in pregnancy, we have to terminate. It has eclampsia only. But if she's already in a respiratory distress, we will not give her Maxel. We need to give her other anticonvulsant drugs.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, since proteinuria will be detected on lab investigation, is it right to mention pre-eclampsia as diagnosis?
So it is not only lab investigation, it is a bedside test. So these are the urine dipsticks are there. There are dipsticks which are available. When you ask the patient to pass urine, and you will be given this small bottle. So you can ask the patient to pass urine in those bottle, and you can do the dipstick test. So that these are the bedside tests which can be done. So it is not mandatory that you are dependent on lab investigation. It is a bedside test which are included in your this examination part.
Okay, ma'am. So we have to do that during exam.
So are you either you can be asked to do those tests, or otherwise we will give you the finding that urine albumin is 1+. Because without that you can't label it as preeclampsia, because edema is not a this marker or a mandatory criteria to label it as preeclampsia. For preeclampsia, to define it as preeclampsia, you need to have proteinuria.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, can you please repeat the classification of HELLP syndrome?
HELLP syndrome, the one classification is this partial HELLP and complete HELLP. So HELLP is basically, there are 3 criteria. There should be hemolysis. The second is elevated liver enzymes, and the third is the low platelet. Now, so if there is hemolysis, so ultimately there will be low hemoglobin also. There is the LDH will also increase, and the platelets will also reduce. Because the hemolysis can occur in the liver, so secondary to that, there is elevated liver enzyme. So SGOT and SGPT are raised. So this is the pathology behind that. Okay. So now they can be partial HELLP, or they can be complete HELP. So if any 2 parameters are deranged, like if she has low hemoglobin and LDH is raised, and there is also low platelet, so you can label that is thrombocytopenia, so you can label it as partial HELLP. If all the 3 parameters are deranged, so you can say it is complete HELLP. So if 2 of the 3 parameters are present, you label it as partial HELLP, otherwise complete HELLP. This is what.
Okay, ma'am, management of HELLP syndrome.
So again, HELLP syndrome. Whenever a severe preeclampsia, these are what are the complications? I did not cover this. This is very fast. So whenever a severe preeclampsia patient, what are the complications in severe preeclampsia? So HELLP, eclampsia, these are the complications which can occur in a severe preeclampsia patient. So I told you, when a severe preeclampsia patient is there and her BP is not getting controlled, or she is going towards her complication, that whether she is complaining of blinding of vision, or decreased urine output, or epigastric pain. So these are the signs of impending eclampsia. So in all these conditions, the ultimate aim is to terminate the pregnancy, because these are secondary to pregnancy. So the ultimate aim in all these is to terminate the pregnancy. Now in HELLP syndrome, we don't need to immediately terminate the pregnancy. We have a cover of 24 hours. We can wait and watch, not wait and watch. We have the 24 hours. So if you need to do a PV examination, in those, if you feel that the cervix is inducible, and you can induce that patient, you can give her in that meantime, you can give her a steroid cover, and you can induce that way. But if you feel that her is uninducible, her Bishop score is very poor, so you can give her a steroid cover. You can wait for 24 hours, and you can do a section. So ultimate aim, whenever a patient is severe preeclamptic, so if you remember that the BP is not getting controlled, she's about, you feel that she can through a convulsion, so you have to terminate the pregnancy. But in eclampsia, so again I will come to the same point, eclampsia, fetal bradycardia not coming back to the normal, you have to do immediate section. Eclampsia, fetal bradycardia, but there is a pickup with a good heart rate, good Bishop score, you have to induce the patient. Eclampsia, fetal bradycardia coming back to the normal, but poor Bishop score, do a section. HELLP syndrome with very low platelet count. Again, see, HELLP syndrome with very low platelet count, 20,000 counts, we can't do a cesarean section for her. So you have to give her platelet transfusion, you have to give her DEXA cover, you have to monitor fetal heart rate, and then do a section with if there is a poor Bishop score. If there is a good Bishop score, you can still induce her. But in HELLP syndrome, you can't wait for more than 24 hours. If she doesn't deliver in 24 hours, or if her labor doesn't progresses in 24 hours, if she's two finger loose only, do a section. So that is the time limit which we have in HELLP syndrome. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
One more thing I want to tell you. One more thing I want to tell you, that if a patient is severe preeclamptic, that her BP is 150, 100, 160, 100, 160 by 120. Still, she is not complaining of any epigastric pain. She's not complaining of any headache, blurring of vision, but she's complaining. She's not complaining of headache, but she's complaining of blindness. So that is a cortical blindness due to thrombosis of the cortical blood vessels. So you have to label it as eclampsia. So for labeling it as eclampsia, throwing a convulsion is not a mandem. So throwing a convulsion is one thing, and cortical blindness, presence of single cortical blindness is also to be labeled it as eclampsia. You don't need to wait for that patient to throw a convulsion. That is what I want to add.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Ma'am, another question. Can you please summarize how do we give a final diagnosis in pregnancy-induced hypertension? What is must to be mentioned and what should be avoided mentioning?
This patient, whatever, Mrs. First of all, you need to, when Vani ma'am takes, Vani ma'am is examining, she's your examiner, whatever, many examiners, they want to give respect to the women you have examined. So Mrs. XYZ. Don't say my patient name Rita Yadav. Okay. Say Mrs. Rita Yadav. So first of all that. So Mrs. XYZ, primary gravida with 32 weeks of gestation, complaining of 32 weeks of gestation by date. So you have calculated by date, not by ultrasound. So you don't have to by 32 weeks of gestation by date with bilateral lower limb edema. On examination, her BP is 140/90. So you have to be sure that 140/90 there is on 2 readings 6 hours apart. Okay. So her BP 140/90, 2 readings 6 hours apart. The presence of protein urea. In bracket you can mention that urine albumin 1+. Just a minute. Mrs. XYZ, so I'll just summarize once again. So Mrs. XYZ, primary gravida with 32 weeks of gestation by date with BP reading of 140/90, 2 readings 6 hours apart, associated with protein urea. My diagnosis will be preeclampsia under evaluation. Okay, this is the way.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
Right. Ma'am, another question. Why can't we use amlodipine in pregnancy?
So amlodipine, it is not contraindicated in pregnancy. So amlodipine is a class of this calcium channel blockers only. But we have a more safer drug, that is labetalol, which is available, which has a good impact on the fetoplacental circulation. So calcium channel blockers, they can sometimes reduce the fetal circulation, especially amlodipine. That is why it is not more commonly used. So that is the more commonly. So whenever a patient is on labetalol and still a BP is not getting controlled, post-delivery, please switch her immediately on amlodipine. But because we have a more safer drug, which has a good impact on the fetoplacental circulation, that is why we prefer labetalol.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, do we give MgSO4 for stopping a conversion or to prevent next conversion?
It is an anti-conversion. We give to prevent next conversion, not because this conversion has already occurred. So this conversion, because the normal duration of any conversion is for 30 to 40 seconds, up to 1 minute. So this conversion, which is suppose a patient is throwing conversion in front of me. So I want to give this conversion, even if you don't give a access, this conversion automatically stop in 30 to 40 seconds. What I am bothered about that immediately after this conversion stop, immediately she can do another conversion within next 1 or 2 minutes. So we need to give to prevent another conversion. It is an anti-conversion, not to stop this conversion. Because if she's throwing conversion again and again, like suppose she's conversing in front of me and now this conversion has stopped, I have given her Maxel and again she's throwing a conversion, then we need to give her other anti-epileptics. The Maxel will not play a role that if she goes into status epilepticus, then we have to give her other IV Levitra and something like that. This Maxel will not work.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, indications or prophylaxis of MGSO, indications of prophylaxis of MGSO4, indications of MGSO4 apart from PIH?
So apart from PIH, there is one indication only. That is, it is given for neuroprotection in preterm babies. But it is not common. But and the dose is not limited. The low dose Maxil is given. Like here we give the 4 gram of loading dose. There we give 2 gram. And instead of in Zuspan regimen, we continue 2 gram per hour. So here we continue 1 gram per hour. So that is mainly used for neuroprotection in case of preterm babies. Not babies, gestation. Yeah.
Anesthesia in PIH C-section. Why is GA contraindicated? And what levels should BP be maintained in case of hypertensive emergency?
Who said GA is contraindicated? Maximum section we do in GA only. Because what happens due to severe preeclampsia, anesthetists don't want to give spinal anesthesia. Because the severe preeclampsia patient, they are accompanied with low platelet count, deranged INR, so they don't want to pierce they don't want to pierce and enter into the spinal canal, because there's a tendency due to secondary to low platelet and increased blood pressure. There can be coagulopathy, there can be hematoma formation. So GA is more commonly used in severe preeclampsia or eclampsia section. The problem with GA is that if she's severe preeclampsia, many times the patient is not immediately extubated, but GA is more commonly used.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, can eclampsia be seen in postnatal period?
Yes. So eclampsia can be antenatal, intranatal or perinatal, but postpartum basically. But and postpartum is more dangerous. Why it is dangerous? Because antenatally and intranatally, so we are monitoring the patient. She's in front of us many a times. But postnatally, her BP was normal. Many a times, a patient with normotensive patient can also throw a convulsion. So we need to know that raised BP is not only a marker that she can throw a convulsion. It is basically the irritability of the cerebral vasculature which leads to or cerebral edema which leads to the patient to throw a convulsion. So in postpartum patient, normally patient after they are delivered, they are kept practically I'm telling you, they are kept back in the ward. Normally antenatal patients are kept in the front row. Postnatally the patient are kept back in the ward. So postnatally also she can throw a convulsion, and it is more severe because many times it gets ignored. So that is why it is. So eclampsia can be antenatal, it can be intranatal, like while delivering she can throw a convulsion, and it can be postnatal also.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, why placenta previa patient don't develop preeclampsia?
No, it is not like that.
Hello?
Placenta. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello. It is not like that. Placenta previa patient will not develop preeclampsia. Like, where did you read? Have you read somewhere?
Pooja, if you can comment to it in the chat box.
There is no correlation between the preeclampsia and placenta previa. Like, it is possible.
Okay, ma'am.
They are two different entities. Placenta previa is simply that the placenta has come and it has implanted at the lower side, and preeclampsia is secondary to there is a increased blood pressure. There is a raised blood pressure. So these two entities can occur simultaneously.
Yeah, ma'am. Ma'am, next question. Since we will take only one BP reading in exam, is it still fine to label the patient PIH, or mentioning 2 times 6 hours apart in diagnosis is important?
Because when you get a case, you already know that when you get a case, she'll be already admitted in the ward. So she'll be either on antihypertensive, or the patient will give you history कि मुझे admit किया है कि मेरा BP बढ़ गया था.
Right.
See, you will get patients which are already admitted in the ward. Okay.
Yeah.
So your history will change accordingly. That the patient is admitted, like she'll give you history. The patient came for a routine OPD visit and she was told that her BP readings are high. So that way you can see in your history that the 2 reading BP 6 hours apart were high. So she She was advised, she was admitted and she was investigated, blah, blah, blah. That's it.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, is in case of chronic hypertension, do we wait till term or terminate before?
See, again, whenever there is it is case to case. See, chronic hypertension, basically she is diagnosed prior to 20 weeks only. That is why we have labeled it her it as chronic hypertension. Okay? So now it depends how is the of a pregnancy. If a BP is well controlled, we can continue up to term 38, 39 weeks. Again, if a BP is not getting controlled, if her fetus is getting compromised, there are Doppler changes, or she is developing any symptom, we may have to terminate the pregnancy. So that depends on her and her fetus behavior in third trimester.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, how do we terminate pregnancy after one? Will we terminate pregnancy after one episode of conversion, or how many episodes, and how do we decide?
We have to terminate. I told you, severe preeclampsia and complication. The treatment is delivery. Why? Because pregnancy is the cause of preeclampsia. Pregnancy is the cause of preeclampsia and its complication, be it a health syndrome, be it a eclampsia, be it whatever.
So she will keep on having conversions till the point that she is pregnant. So we have to terminate it.
I'm sorry, I didn't get what.
So she will keep having conversions in that case if we don't terminate. She won't stop.
No, it is possible she has to one conversion, but one conversion in pregnancy is eclampsia. It is a diagnosis of exclusion. You have to label it as eclampsia only. And the treatment of eclampsia is terminate the pregnancy. That is what I'm saying. Then if she's through the conversion, if her BP is not getting controlled, if she's going into health syndrome, now what we are bothered about, now we are more bothered about the mother. Suppose there is a 28, and I will tell you there is a 24 weeks patient. Okay, she is 24 weeks patient. She is through a conversion. I'm not bothered about the baby. Then she'll go till term. She has through a conversion. I have to terminate because saving mother's life is more important. So here we will induce her. Here we terminate her in view of maternal for maternal indication. We terminate the pregnancy. We are not bothered about the fetal thing. For maternal indication, we terminate the pregnancy. So if there is a complication of this preeclampsia, severe pregnancy, not getting BP control, we have to terminate the pregnancy.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, in postnatal seizure, should we use MgSO4 or any other anti-epileptic?
No, MgSO4. See, if it is pregnancy, the two words, pregnancy, conversion. Pregnancy being it up till 6 weeks postpartum. Okay. So the third, which is the correlating word, is the eclampsia. So when you label it as eclampsia, MgSO4 is the drug of choice. If MgSO is not working, despite giving MgSO4, she is throwing a conversion, then you will resort to other medication. Okay. Or if the patient gives you a history कि pregnancy से पहले ही उसको conversion आता था, तो फिर she is not eclampsia, she is a case of epilepsy, and then you need to start her on Levipil or something else. Pregnancy conversion is eclampsia by default. You have to send Maxton.
Ma'am, can you explain the term intercurrent fits?
Sorry?
Intercurrent fits.
Intercurrent fits?
Yes.
Associated with pregnancy. Sorry, I didn't get your question because I've never heard of this thing.
Yugandhara, if possible, you can unmute. I'll ask you to unmute at the end. You can explain the question to ma'am. We'll move on to the next question, ma'am. Will you please explain again about concentration leads to PIH?
Hemoconcentration doesn't lead to PIH. I told you secondary to PIH. See, normally what happens, a patient, if she's, her antenatal period is uneventful, so her, suppose this patient of yours, she had visited to a OPD and her hemoglobin was at 28 weeks, it was 10, but now when you did a hemoglobin, it is 7. Okay, so now why it is coming, actually it is 10 only, but because secondary to hemoconcentration, it is coming to 7. Now why it is coming secondary to secondary to microangiopathy, which happens, the constriction of the vessels, there is clumping of RBCs, there is clumping of platelets. That is why secondary to which there is low platelet count, there is low RBC, and also she can also, that there can be a reason that hemolysis can also occur. So that may lead to hemoconcentration and low platelet count. So the more common is because of microangiopathy, there is clumping of RBC, there is clumping of platelet, which lead to this hemo concentration and low platelet count.
Ma'am, if examiner asks which is better, Zuspan or Pritchard, what to answer?
No, they will not ask you better. They will say which is more common. If they mostly ask that which is more done in your hospital. So see, every the Zuspan and Pritchard. So Zuspan is more better, it is more better, but Pritchard is more commonly given. Why it is commonly? Because it is an IM dose. Okay, so it is. It doesn't need to be. It is in this Zuspan. There has to be continuous IV line. There's a continuous infusion of Maxtel. So it has to be continuously monitored. So when a patient is given Maxtel, it needs a continuous and very hard monitoring. Whereas in Pritchard regime, you need to give every 4 RDs, so it has a less aggressive monitoring. You need to monitor those 4 parameters only, but it has a less aggressive monitoring. And suppose here in Zuspan, you are giving continuous IV Maxtel. So suppose the drip rate goes up and down, so she can land up into cardiac arrest because that magnesium sulfate, it causes the relaxation of those muscles. So she can land up with the respiratory depression and she can land up with the cardiac arrest. So that is why this is more commonly given. Pritchard regime is more commonly given, but more effective is this Zuspan because it is given IV Maxtel is going directly intravenously and it can act more what to say, earlier. The time of action is earlier as compared to Zuspan regime. But more practical or more convenient for giving is Pritchard regime. Did you understand what I wanted to say?
Yeah, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am, if eclampsia is not controlled on MgSO4, what is the management? Levipil, you said, right, ma'am?
Right, maybe it is not Levipil. Because now it is not eclampsia, now it has gone into this epilepsy wala criteria. So now you will give Levipil or any other phenobarbital or other drugs which medicine people will give. So we can give phenobarbital, you will have to give this phenobarbital or Levipil or all those kinds of drugs.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, just one question about confirmation that if after one conversion we give MgSO4, stabilize her, and then terminate by C-section, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't get it. Sorry, what?
It's a confirmatory question. She's asking you after one conversion, we'll give MgSO4, then we'll stabilize her, and then terminate by C-section, right? And this is applicable to any trimester.
No, I told you if she throws a conversion, post-conversion, you have to assess her. You have to do a Bishop score. If she's already 3 centimeter dilated, so then why will you do a section for her? Then you will try to deliver her vaginally. If her Bishop score is very poor, so that is what I'm saying. See, eclampsia, you have to terminate the pregnancy. That is for sure. Any trimester, you have to terminate the pregnancy. But how to terminate the pregnancy, that depends upon the patient. How is the patient? Like if there is no fetal bradycardia, if she's a good Bishop score, then I can induce her because I've already started on her Maxtel. So I hope that she will not through another conversion, so I can deliver her vaginally. So it doesn't mean you have to do a section for her, but definitely you have to deliver her. See, doing a section and delivering the patient are two different things. Section is a method of delivering the patient. You understand
Right,
what I want to tell you?
Yes, ma'am. Basically, we have to assess fetal heart rate and the Bishop score, and then we decide whether it's a C-section or it's a normal delivery by induction or something else.
Whether you can give a trial for normal vaginal delivery.
Right. Ma'am, about intercurrent fits, in textbook, it's defined as when the patient becomes conscious after recovery from convulsions and the pregnancy continues beyond 48 hours. Time limit is arbitrary as a period of 7 to 10 days has been mentioned. What exactly does this mean?
Which book are you reading from? This is mentioned.
Ma'am, I'll ask Yugandhara to directly message you on WhatsApp to ask this question. Is that all right?
No, it is okay. No, what I want to tell you, it's it is very, very, very rare if she through the conversion, suppose in around 22 weeks, and if the patient is stabilized after that, that is what I'm saying, 99.99% we don't continue the pregnancy. But if for pregnancy, it is very rare. So this might be any of your texts, because in routine, what I'm talking about, Williams or Fernando Arias or the Iron Donald, it will not be mentioned. It must be mentioned in some of your this book, this your PG, what do you say, this NEET wala books. So that is what I'm saying. In normal conditions, we don't continue the pregnancy. So you should be more aware about the common things. In one or the two rarest of the rare, one pregnancy might have been continued, but that is very rare. Normally we terminate the pregnancy, but still the person who has raised the question can ask me.
Okay, ma'am. I guess that's it for today, ma'am. Yes. Yeah. No more questions.